Okay, so for question number one, first of all, anyone wants to ask questions, they can either go to the address that's on the screen now, or.edu/live stream/r-Breitowitz, or email me at akaufman@or.edu. Okay, for our first question, what did Shem and Aver learn that was able to occupy Yaakov day and night for 14 years?
That's an excellent question. First, I do want to say Shalom Aleichem to everybody, and I hope your Pesach was inspirational. I hope your Pesach was elevating for you. I know that for some of us, it may have been a little more isolated than usual, but I hope that all of us felt the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and also the connection to our loved ones, even if they were not physically with us. So welcome, and Baruch Hashem that Hashem put in this technology in the world that enables us to be connected, even though there are many problems with the internet and the like. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu is also showing us that there is a potential for good. In terms of the yeshiva of Shem v'Aver, it's a very, very interesting question. As you say, obviously there was a makom of divine wisdom, Shem and Aver, and it did occupy Yaakov for 14 years. It's pretty clear he was not going over Rebbe Akiva Eiger's or Ketzaises, Nesivases, or even Rambans. I think we have to understand that the yeshiva of Shem v'Aver, in terms of its halachic curriculum, was primarily the Noahide laws. Now, you may think, well, the Noahide laws are only 7 laws, but not really. If you take a law such as establishing a court in order to do mishpat, then you have to go through a whole elaborate system of what is a just society. In some ways, that may even be more difficult than Choshen Mishpat, because instead of just having rules, you have to go over kind of starting from square one. How do you construct an ideal society? So halachically, it would have been the Noahide laws. But I believe that primarily the yeshiva of Shem v'Aver was something that we would call Chachmat Elokut, the divine wisdom. You can call it Kabbalah, you can call it mysticism, you could call it spiritual meditation, but essentially it was a way of being makasher yourself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through various dargos of Ruach HaKodesh and Nevuah. Now we find much later in Tanakh, in the book of Malachim, that the Nevi'im had schools where people would come and actually learn how to be a prophet, prophecy schools. Now the Rambam writes that just because you went to Navi school, there was no guarantee you would be a Navi. You had to have all the different milas of spiritual perfection, but you also needed the training of techniques and the like. And I believe that the yeshiva of Shem v'Aver was a yeshiva which concentrated on Yedias Hashem and being connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that could indeed take 14 years. It could take a whole lifetime, and more than one lifetime. Hashem is infinite, and how we are makasher to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is also infinite. So it was not that similar, I think, to a yeshiva curriculum bisman hazeh.
In the 1980s, there was a kosher vinegar scandal where ethanol was used as alcohol and accidentally labeled as kosher despite coming from grapes, which lacked insufficient supervision. If anything, kashrus industrialization has become more widespread. If the same case would have happened today, or if the Rav was passing them, would we have to kasher all of our kalim? Although bittul would have been easiest, it seems to me that wouldn't apply because the taste of all the products is affected strongly by sharp ingredients like vinegar. And part 2 to the question is, how does Yotzi v'Nichnas work for mashgichim if they're under lockdown and can't get to production plants?
Yeah, these are both 2 very, very difficult questions. I myself don't remember the kosher vinegar scandal, but just a little background. All of us know that wine that's not mavushal, that has not been pasteurized, has not been cooked. Actually, pasteurization is a machlokas, is that called a mavushal? If it's handled by non-Jews, it is usher for a Jew to drink that wine. Now, yayin nesech da'oraisa is wine that was actually used and poured for idolatry, a wine that goyim touch or handle or even produce, but do not use for avodah zarah, is technically, we sometimes call it yayin nesach, but it's technically called stam yainam, and it's only usher midrabanan. And there are two different reasons. One is a gezerah because of yayin nesach, and the other is that wine often creates friendships, and friendships, God forbid, could lead to intermarriage, and therefore, as a distancing from friendships with non-Jews, we prohibit the wine. Now, that prohibition will extend to even when the wine turns into vinegar. So the chometz that comes from either yayin nesach deoraisa or stam yainam midrabanan is usher. But there's a very, very important difference, and that is yayin nesach deoraisa is not nullified. So even if it gets mixed in 1,000 parts of kosher wine or some other food, it is not nullified and it's usher. Stam yainam indeed can be batel b'shishim, but as the questioner properly notes, when you have something very, very sharp like vinegar, sometimes depending on how sharp it is, it may not be batel. So as a result, we would certainly advocate that the kalim should be kashered because of the question of whether it would be shayach bitul. Theoretically, we also have the psak that if you leave the kli for 12 months without use, so all of the wine inside gets totally dried out. But again, that would require that you put it away for a year. So unfortunately, kashering would be necessary because of the question of whether bitul b'shishim would work under those circumstances. If it would have been yayin nesach deoraisa, you would actually have no choice because yayin nesach deoraisa is not batel, even bi'elef. Now, the second question, which is a absolutely important question to deal with because that is relevant even if there aren't any scandals, is how do you possibly maintain kosher hashgacha, which is predicated on a mashgiach that is yotzei v'nichnas, when you have various restrictions. Now, for the most part, if you're dealing with local hashgachos, so the mashgiach could still go into the kitchen and do what he's doing. But when you're dealing with international hashgachas, so for example, there's stuff that's made in China, stuff that's made in India, and the mashgiachim are not always there, but they do come in on frequent trips. How does that work? That's a real problem, and I have to admit, I'm not in the kashrus business, so I can't tell you what they're actually doing. But I will tell you that there's a lot of debate in modern Paiskim, regarding the concept of video camera hashgacha. This is Nogeya Chalav Yisrael. It's Nogeya hashgacha generally. That if you have a video setup where a mashgiach or a rav from a remote location, like we're doing right now, would be able to see what's going on, is that sufficient? Some poskim say that does qualify as a Yaitse V'nichnas because the predicate of Yaitse V'nichnas is mirsas. Mirsas simply means that the owner or the employees are afraid of doing anything improper because they never know when they will be caught in the act and when they will be seen. And if that's the case, that could be equally true with a video. In fact, if anything, it is possible that the video might be better in that way because you don't even have a sense of the mashgiach is coming, so to speak, because it can turn on instantaneously and even surreptitiously. The interesting question is, if you have a video set up, how often does the mashgiach actually have to see what's going on? In other words, theoretically, one could even make the argument, even if the mashgiach is never checking the video, the very fact that it's available creates a built-in mirsas, or the alternative would be you would still need kind of a virtual yaitse v'nichnas. So I apologize for not having the actual data of what the OU does, what the Star K does. I can try to check it and maybe supplement, but I think video technology could very well work for hashgacha, just as it works for shiurei Torah and the like. But I do want to add as well that in many, many situations, mashgichim are still able to physically go in as part of their tasks, provided they keep the requisite distancing. They are, after all, no different and even more important than the employees that are actually preparing food.
The Arbarbanel in Parshas Tazria says that a Yoledes brings a chatas because ein yisurim below avon, v'hayoleda salvat sara sakana milsa al avonim. This implies that every woman that gives birth has suffered pain in doing so. Would this mean that a woman that has never done an Avera wouldn't be able to give birth? How can we understand this?
Well, it is a good question, and as I say, the Abarbanel was one of our great Meforshim, and all of his words always repay careful study. But it is also well known that the Abarbanel often offered original insights that didn't clearly have a makar in Chazal, or that indeed were contradicted by Chazal. This is one of those examples. Because Chazal say, as Rashi says, that the reason the Yeledes brings a sin offering, the reason she brings a korban chatas, is because of the idea that she may have sworn, as she's going through labor pain, that she will never have a child again, and that would be a sin, and for that she needs a certain atonement. The Abarbanel is giving an alternative reason, that the very fact that she is suffering indicates there must be some type of chait, ein yisurim below chait. That statement, of course, is in Chazal, and therefore the chatas is because of the suffering. But here is the thing. So you ask a question, if indeed all suffering comes from chait, so that would mean a woman without chait could never have a child. Well, is that what would happen? Or would it mean a woman without chait would not suffer the pains of childbirth? Again, I think that's a hypothesis that cannot be proven or disproven simply because we don't have a chepsa, a metzias of a person without chait. But again, I'm not sure if your inference is correct. Instead of being medayek, she wouldn't have a child. I think the diak would be she'd have a child without feeling any pain. The question then becomes, would she have to bring a korban chatas? Well, here I think that it's absolutely clear, is it not, that we must be going with, the Torah must be going with a low plug, not making a differentiation, because even if you go with Rashi's reason, that the woman swears she's not going to have a child, certainly not every woman made such an oath, but the Torah says because of those that did, we're machaya b'chatas, so it could very well be by their Barbanel's reason would apply the same way. Now you may say, what do you mean? The Torah cannot differentiate between guilty people and not guilty people? Well, maybe my answer might be that the Torah doesn't want to embarrass the sinners. So it basically says everybody brings, all women in childbirth bring the chatas, so we're not going to single out women in childbirth as being, relative rishayim compared to each other. So there is a concept that perhaps the uniformity of the chatas, even if it wouldn't apply, may be a way of shielding people from unnecessary embarrassment and shame.
It is very confusing for me to know which papers are considered Sheamus and require burial, and which can be discarded. For example, tests my children take and other schoolwork that contain some type of Torah thought pamphlet and magazines that have within them Torah content. I was told by someone over the phone at OU Israel, when asking what to do with their weekly booklet, that I can wrap it up in a plastic bag and discard it with other recyclable paper.
Okay. Well, you're 100% correct. The laws of Sheamus are actually fairly complicated. And the proliferation of Sheamus in recent decades is going beyond the roof. In the olden days, things had to be handwritten or whatever it would be. And now there's all sorts of things. Let me just give you an approach that I think is relatively manageable. You have to differentiate between maybe three types of Sheamus. Type 1 Sheamus are Sheamus that actually have the shame of Hashem on them. Either Yud Kei Vav Kei, Adnos, Aleph Dalet Nun Yud, Elokim, Shakai, meaning written out, an actual shame of Hashem. The Shemos that have action, in fact, the word Shemos means names of God. That's actually what the word Shemos means. So Shemos that have actual names of God, whether they are in written form or in printed form, although that itself is a machlokus, but we're knowing even in printed form, have to be put in geniza. They have to be put in a specially designated place, only for holy things. They cannot be put in paper recycling, garbage recycling. They cannot be destroyed or the like. Now, type 2 shemos are things that do not have Shem Hashem, but they have psukim, or even 3 words of a pasuk, or they have mamore chazal. They're worn out Gomorrahs, although we have to check that there's no Shem of Hashem at the end in the Hadran, or whatever it would be. Now these, Me'ikar Hadin, do not have to be put in Geniza. Me'ikar Hadin, they can be put in newspaper recycling. They cannot be put with garbage. They cannot be put b'makom bizayon. But if they're wrapped up and they're put in a place where they'll be just chopped up and recycled, but not going to be disgustingly mixed with rotting food, that would be mutter. But as you know, their minhag Yisrael is that if it's mamish, a printed sefer, like a Gomorrah, like a Mishnah, or the like, our minhag is we treat it like type 1 Sheamus, and we put it in Geniza. Now, the third category are things like school tests and the like, which have Torah ideas in them, but they're not really in the kavios of a sefer. And this would also include things like drafts of Sforim. For those of you that have ever written Sforim, know you get proofs back and things like that. So there we are somech l'chatchila of wrapping it up and putting it with newspaper recycling, and the minhag of bedafka putting it in Geniza we don't follow. And the truth of the matter is that's what you should do. But then we have even other categories of outlines, notes, just things that remind you you're giving it to our Torah, and you make an outline, but you don't have anything full there. If somebody would read it, they wouldn't even know what you're referring to. That me'ikaret, then you could even put in the garbage. But as I say, we don't want to go more mako than the recycling itself. So I think that newspaper recycling should be as lenient as you get. We should try to treat these inyanim b'kedusha. Okay, so that's basically it. You have type 1 Sheamus, and then you have everything else. Type 1 Sheamus is Geniza. The minhag is to include Gemorahs and Sforim in type 1. Type 2 is everything else. You don't throw it in the garbage. You don't mix it with rotting food, but you can put it in a separate recycling where it can actually be chopped up, destroyed, and then recycled in some other use. Now, in terms of magazines, this creates a real problem. The truth is there were Gedolim that actually were against printing Divrei Torah in newspapers and magazines, simply because it's actually not coveted. If you're going to put it in Geniza, it's not coveted to put Divrei Chol there, so you'd have to go through the magazine and cut out things. That's very laborious. But if, on the other hand, you're going to be somech on the newspaper recycling, then you don't have a problem. You can put the whole magazine in the newspaper recycling.
Can one who stops grooming at the beginning of Sfira get a haircut or shave this Friday because this Shabbos is also Rosh Chodesh?
Yeah, so this is an important leniency that's mamash nogeya tonight and tomorrow, and that is the Mishnah Berurah rules, based on earlier poskim, of course, that when Rosh Chodesh Iyar is Erev Shabbos, so you have a double header, it's both in honor of Rosh Chodesh and in honor of Shabbos. So even if you have observed the Sfira restrictions from the second day of Pesach, as opposed to those who wait till after Rosh Chodesh, when you have this double header, you are allowed to get a haircut on Erev Shabbos. Now, it's interesting. Let me point out that this is an example where people who are more mako would have to be more machmer. There are some people who don't start their Sfira restrictions until Rosh Chodesh Iyar itself. So it's actually brought down, if your starting date is Rosh Chodesh Iyar, you should not lechatchila take advantage of this heter, but you should get your haircut for Shabbos Thursday, today, Erev Rosh Chodesh. Now, on the other hand, the people who start from the second day of Pesach don't have a heter on Thursday. Their heter would be B'dafka Erev Shabbos. Now, Lamaisa, even if you start your Sfira restrictions, Rosh Chodesh, if you didn't get your haircut on Thursday, you are still allowed to do it on Friday, but l'chatchila you try to do it on on Thursday. This is equally true for cutting nails. Now, there's an interesting side question, which for some people may be important, and that is the Mishnah Berurah elsewhere brings a minhag of Rav Yehuda HaChassid that most people do not follow, but some people do, that you never get haircuts or cut your fingernails on Rosh Chodesh. This is the thing, you don't do it on Rosh Chodesh. So the question is, if you follow Rav Yehuda HaChassid, do you have a heter on this Rosh Chodesh? Because the kavod Erev Shabbos ends during Sfira to be mekel. So this is an interesting question, maybe for only a minority of the audience, but those of you who follow Rav Yehuda HaChassid, do you have a heter to get the haircut? Because you don't do it on Rosh Chodesh. So that's a machlokas. The Mishnah Berurah does not address this question explicitly. Rav Moshe Feinstein does say that even if you normally do not cut your hair on Rosh Chodesh, you still have a heter of Rosh Chodesh, Erev Shabbos during Sfira. So there will be mutter. That's Rav Moshe. The Stipler, it is said, was machmer, and he said that you have to treat it the same as every Rosh Chodesh, and therefore the heter would be Thursday, not Friday. That's what he says. I think the minhag ha'olam is to be mekel like Rav Moshe, so even if you follow Rav Yehuda HaChassid, you would get your haircut tomorrow. It's actually tonight, Thursday night. That's what we do Thursday night as well.
What exactly is and not allowed to be said or thought in a modern bathroom? I understand that neither Hashem's name nor a pasuk from the 5 books of Moshe should be said, and preferably not thought either. However, Hashem exists literally everywhere. He is our existence. He is also in the bathroom itself. What precautions are chumras, and what is the ikr that we are not supposed to think or say?
Yeah, this is a very, very excellent question. Modern bathrooms are very, very different, at least in most places, than the Beis HaKisei of the Gomorrah. In the Beis HaKisei of the Gomorrah, that was an outhouse. There actually was a physical accumulation of excrement and mei raglaim, and even if it was temporarily clean, it was a mokaim, which normally had such an accumulation, and as a result, it was totally usher to even think of divrei Torah. The modern bathroom, this is a big machlokas. There is something in the Gemara that was described as the Persian bathrooms. And the Persian bathrooms seem to have been some type of system. We don't know exactly. That was somewhat similar, in which the excrement got washed away right away. And the Gemara indicates there were certain leniencies in the bathroom because it was not a makaim where tsoya accumulated. So the truth of the matter is, me'ikir hadin, there's all sorts of questions. One could even make the case that you would be allowed to make a bracha in a modern bathroom, me'ikir hadin. And this is discussed in terms of shasat chak b'di'evid. What if you're locked, in a bathroom, etc.? Are you allowed to do anything? But the minhag ha'olam is quite properly that we are generally not somech on those leniencies, and we generally treat even the modern bathrooms, at least mitam minhag, with all of the chumras of a Beis HaKisei. But again, I acknowledge that there is a certainly strong makom to be machalik. Let me point out as well that in many modern bathrooms, which if you have both a toilet and a bath and a shower, you have another halachic category, that it's not only a Beis HaKisei, but it's also a Beis HaMerchatz, where people stand nude. And that has its own halachas, meaning that's a separate restriction from Beis HaKisei if it's a makom where people generally are nude. Now, that also depends on whether the shower is a separate compartment or whether it's an open bathtub shower, etc. So one has to understand that unless it's just a toilet, in a modern bathroom, you have 2 different halachic categories that overlap, Beis HaKisei and Beis HaMerchatz, and the flushing away of the excrement does not take away the Beis HaMerchatz problem. But either way, even if you assume the strictest view that all the laws of Beis HaKisei apply to a modern bathroom toilet, whether it's a combination or not, you still have an interesting question. Okay, what is it that I'm not allowed to think about? I'm not allowed to think about Torah. Okay, that's very, very true. am I allowed to think about Hashem, how great Hashem is? So again, it's brought down that one should not do that. Now we know we have different stories about different Gedolim who would read philosophical books, or Elchanan Wasserman, who actually knew German. German, I think, was one of his native languages. He would read Kant, Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, one of the most difficult philosophical works in the bathroom. It is brought down in some svarim that you can kind of have a negative mussar. You can think about the body and the limitations of the body, even the repulsiveness of the body that has to do what it's doing. But one should not think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Indeed, let me point out that in the Nefesh HaChaim, there's an interesting discussion. It's very well known that the Nefesh HaChaim was written at the time of the beginning of Hasidus, after the Gra put some Hasidim in Cherem, and Rav Chaim Volozhiner had a much more conciliatory approach. He did not use Haramim, but there was a critique of Hasidus, and one of the areas that there was a critique was the notion of Einod Milvadai, because one of the Yesodis of Hasidus is that Hashem is everywhere, and even the idea of Tzimtzum, that Hashem withdrew in order to create a world, is only a mashal. Hashem is in the rock, and Hashem is in the person. And on one hand, this means HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everything. Einod Milvado does not only mean there is no God except God, but it means there's no Metzius except God. Now that sounds beautiful, and that sounds inspirational, and we often say it. But the Gra held that was a very, very dangerous idea, because if God is everywhere, then God is in the bathroom, then God is in the tinup, then God is in the Aveira. And at that point, the Gra and the Rav Chaim Volozhiner writes, at that point, you're not going to make limitations. Why shouldn't I praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Beis HaKisei, if he's in the Beis HaKisei, if he's in the Tzayah? So, because of this, Rav Chaim Volozhiner says, although in a sense, of course, it's true, but that's kalape, the ultimate reality of God. But in terms of how we have to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this physical universe, we have to limit our connection with boundaries and guvul and simtsumim and the like. And therefore, even though God is in the Beis HaKisei, maybe I shouldn't say it, but we're not allowed to connect to Hashem in that particular way. It's kind of a double think. And as I say, Nefesh HaChaim specifically addresses that particular issue. This was his issue with, many say, with the Balatanya. The Balatanya in Chelik Beis of the Tanya called Yichud V'Amuna. That's where he articulates the idea of Einod Milvadai. Hashem is everywhere. Hashem is not in everything. Hashem is everything. And the Nefesh HaChaim, kind of addresses that particular issue. So it is a hard question.
Is the minhag Yerushalayim wear stockings if the community you are involved in is in kollel?
Can you repeat the end of the question, please?
Is the minhag Yerushalayim to wear stockings if the community that you are involved in is kollel?
Yes, that is the minhag outside. Let me just give a little bit of a background. The idea that a religious woman must wear stockings, although it almost seems commonplace, everybody knows that. It's not at all pashut. We know that Chazal do tell us, shok be'isha erva. The shok, the revealed shok of a woman is called an erva, and that's part of the leg. But there's a huge machlokes poskim. There's the in the Chazon Ish, other poskim. What is the meaning of shok? So some say shok is the part of the leg that's from the knee, including the knee upwards. Meaning to say, the leg below the knee is not an erva at all. Now, if you take that position, which is actually the pashtus of the Mishnah Berurah, that would mean as long as a woman is wearing a dress that covers her knee, even when she's sitting and moving, let me add, then the lower leg, you don't need stockings, you don't need socks, because the lower leg is not nichlal in an erva that needs a kisa. So if you follow the view that shaik, thigh, is the thigh, the upper leg, then it would turn out stockings are totally unnecessary. And the only thing that would have to be covered is the leg up to the knee. Now, the other view is that of the Chazon Ish, that shaik includes the lower leg all the way down to the ankle. So it doesn't mean thigh, it refers to the lower leg. Thigh is called yerech. Now, the question is, according to that logic, the lower leg has to be covered, but stockings shouldn't be good enough. A stocking is a form-fitting thing. I mean, after all, could you have a mini skirt and wear stockings? No, because since the upper leg has to be covered, stockings are not a good covering. So mimanavshach. Stockings make no sense from a logical standpoint, because if you define shaik as the upper leg, the lower leg doesn't need stockings. If you define shaik as the lower leg, then stockings shouldn't help, because stockings don't help because they're form-fitting for something that needs to be covered. So in some ways, one could say, mimanavshach, either stockings are not necessary or stockings shouldn't help. So the way the minhag ha'olam turns out is that mi'ikar hadin, we are actually following, at least most Kailo communities are actually following the Mishnah Berurah, that the lower leg does not have to be covered at all. But as a minhag of additional sinias, we say that there should be stockings, which should at least be some type of covering, even though it would not be an adequate covering for anything that had to be covered me'ikar hadin, at least for the leg. For the arm, actually, it is, but not for the leg. So really, it's mitam minhag. Now, the role of minhagim in sinias, which go beyond the halacha, is an interesting thing. Because that would mean that when you're not in that makom, you don't necessarily have to do it. But would have to say that at least within a Kailo community, it is relatively makubal, almost universally, that religious women, when they are outside, should wear stockings. But again, it may depend on the particulars of the community. One could imagine a more modern community, which is Mekel, and at that point, I'm not going to tell a person they have to be machmir. But I believe that in Yerushalayim, the minhag is to be machmir on it.
Can one daven with a minyan where the chazan wears a Mashiach badge with the crown and flag?
Well, this is a whole problem about how are we mityaches to Chabad, and I want to say that in some ways maybe I am not the right person to ask, because I have personally a tremendous affection for Chabad. I have a respect for Chabad. I've worked with many shluchim, and I've seen how devoted they are. And indeed, I have to say that even in the yeshiva world, which is largely anti-Chabad, when we have some fellow that's visiting Thailand or Hong Kong, we will be in contact with the Chabad Shaliach to take care of our Talmidim. So we use them even if we abuse them sometimes. I think the important yesod for me is this. There are things Chabad does that we're chaylik on. But the belief that the Rebbe is Mashiach, or was Mashiach, or is Mashiach, is, we believe, a mistake. It is inaccurate. It's not true. But it is not a matter of kefira in Ikrei Emunah, because the Yud Gimel Ikrim say that there will be a Mashiach that will redeem us. If one is kaifer in Mashiach, that's kefira. But if one makes a mistake as to who they believe is Mashiach, that is a mistake. Not every mistake is epicursis. Now, you may say, oh, so what if somebody believes Yeshua was Mashiach? That's very, very different. If I believe in a Mashiach that says the Torah was nischalef, the Torah was replaced, then I'm a kaifer, because one of the Ikrei Emunah is the Torah is eternal. But if I believe in a Mashiach who never said the Torah was displaced, and lehepech, he was calling on people to keep the Torah, but he's dead, and I believe in a second coming, okay, so it's true, lahalacha, we reject the second coming, but there is at least one makor in Chazal that says it's possible. There is one Gomorrah, only one Gomorrah, that says Mashiach can come back from the dead. So as a result, one has to be very careful. There are many mistakes that people make that do not qualify them as kaifrim bi'ikrei amuna. I mean, you might say, can I have a chazan who believes everybody should go to college, even though, in the yeshiva we say that's wrong? Well, obviously that's going to be okay. So as a result, Lanias Daiti, I would have no problem in having a chazan being mitzi with somebody who believes that the Rebbe was Mashiach, and even if he believes the Rebbe is Mashiach, and the Rebbe is going to come back from the dead. Do I agree with that belief? No, I don't. But does that make a person not be kairos? No, it does not. Now, there is within Chabad another stream that is further towards the Meshugana end of the spectrum, which talks about the Rebbe as being God and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Nislabesh in the personality of the tzaddik, and they pray to the Rebbe, and they have a picture of the Rebbe, and they daven to him. That is very different. That is serious stuff, and that may be nimshach to avodah zarah, and that you cannot be connected to. But Baruch Hashem, that's a fairly lunatic fringe, and even the mainstream of Chabad has largely disassociated themselves from it. So, no, not every. Again, I want to point out. Obviously, I'm not any official spokesman, and there may be other rabbanim that may strongly disagree with me. But this is my approach. I myself would be happy to daven in a Chabad minyan, at least most Chabad minyanim in the United States. Eretz Yisrael might be a little more extreme. The lunatic fringe you actually find a little bit more here than you find in the United States.
Why are people that were killed because they were Jews, for example, in the Holocaust, referred to as Kedoshim, if many were sinners and rejected their religion, and if given the choice, they would reject Judaism to save their own lives?
Yeah, this is a very, very excellent question. You often hear people say that anybody who was killed because they were a Jew died al Kiddush Hashem. This is a very common thing. We talk about 6 million Kiddushim. Now, people will tell you that the makar for that statement is a statement from the Rambam, where the Rambam says anyone who was killed because he's Jewish died al Kiddush Hashem. But I'll tell you, although it is quoted in the name of the Rambam, nobody has managed to find where the Rambam says that. Now, we have Rambams, we have Mishnah Torah, we have Moreh Nevuchim, we have Perush Mishnayos, we have letters the Rambam wrote. And in the Igros that we have in our Rishus, we actually do not find this statement. And the question you're asking is especially good. I'm just elaborating on your question a little bit, because the normal paradigm of Kiddush Hashem involves the choices that a person makes. The guy goes over to me and says, convert to Christianity or I will kill you. And a person says, I am willing to die for the glory of Hashem. He had a choice. He could have become a Christian. He could have been spared. He decided to die. That's Kiddush Hashem. So l'chayra, Kiddush Hashem always means the person had a choice, and he made the choice to glorify HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's Kiddush Hashem. In the Holocaust, in fact, I can go further. Your question was about the non-religious Jews. One could even ask, even a religious Jew that died al Kiddush Hashem, what element of choice did that person have? If he would have said, I want to be a Christian, the Nazis would have killed him anyway. In fact, there were Jews who converted to Christianity, just generally, Rahman al-Islam, and they also died in Auschwitz. In fact, there's a woman that's a saint in the Catholic Church who died as a nun, but she died because she was Jewish. And people were very upset. Why would the Catholic Church claim her as a martyr? So on that, I could answer, which is why your question is better than my question. On that, I could answer that many say that sometimes Kiddush Hashem is the way you die. You didn't have a choice, but you die with your emunah, you die with your bitachon, you die with your faith that Gam Zu L'Taiva, even though you don't understand it. That's called a Kiddush Hashem. In fact, Rav Dessler describes very movingly. He was already in England, but his family was in Kelm, the famous base Musar of Rav Simcha Zissel. And he describes how the Gedolim and Kedoshim of Kelm died with such dignity, with such menuchas hanefesh, with such emunah, that even the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, were discombobulated. They didn't know what to do. They thought they were dealing with angels. And they almost were not able to shoot them because they were scared. They somehow sensed Kedusha. So there is a concept, therefore, so we're adding a little bit, that Kiddush Hashem sometimes means you made a certain choice that you could have gotten out of the suffering, or sometimes Kiddush Hashem can be the dignity by which you met your death with emunah and bitachon, even when you didn't have that choice. That's Kiddush Hashem. But your question is still a good question. That's okay. But what about the person who didn't bring God into the equation at all? What about the person who rejected God, the person who didn't do mitzvahs, the person who didn't do tshuva, although we never know, in their last moments? How are they sanctifying God's name by being killed by the Nazis? Is it true that every person died al Kiddush Hashem? It's a very excellent question. As I indicated, there's no clear mucker in the Rambam that there is a concept of dying al Kiddush Hashem. But the famous Piasetzner Rebbe, the Eish Kodesh, who himself died in the aftermath of the Warsaw Ghetto, and he preserved for posterity the unforgettable drushos of chizuk that he gave in those years of the Holocaust. And they were found after the war, and they were printed as the Eish Kodesh. And this is a sefer, you can also get it in English. This is a sefer that really every person should read, just to see the greatness of a person in the darkest moments of life. He writes, now this is a bit of a complicated mahalach. He writes that when a person dies because they're a Jew, what Hashem is doing is, Hashem is mishtatef them in the pain of the Shekhinah. That the Shekhinah, when people destroy the Torah, when they violate Hashem's will, there's an infinite pain that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has because of the evil that exists in the world. And once in a while, HaKadosh Baruch Hu lets us be connected to Him by feeling the pain that He's feeling. B'miktsas min hamiktsas. And the very fact that God chose you to be a shutaf in His pain shows the special connection that you have to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The mashal that's given is, and unfortunately we've seen this actually happen in the recent weeks with the coronavirus. Imagine a wife that lost her husband, leaving her on almana, leaving her with Yisayman. She can't allow herself to fall apart and cry in front of the kids because that will destroy them. So normally she goes into her room, she closes the door and she weeps. But every once in a while, she opens the door and allows the children to share in their grief. And that brings them together. Normally, HaKadosh Baruch Hu cries silently because the world could not take that bechia. That bechia would be machriv the world. But every once in a while, and this is such an amazing thought that's very difficult to grasp, Hashem opens the door and makes us partners in His grieving. And that is a tremendous closeness and unity that we have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that creates the Kiddush Hashem. Now, to put it, again, this is a powerful thought, and it's not an easily understood thought, and I don't claim I understand it fully either. This is how the Piasetzner Rebbe was trying to grapple with the Holocaust. It wasn't God's rejection of Am Yisrael. It was God's connection to Am Yisrael that created that suffering. So I hope this helps a little bit.
How is a person yotzi the mitzvah of Peru Uruvu, and how would one apply the Gomorrah and Brachas that seemingly talks more about davening for a son?
Well, it's very, very clear. The very first mitzvah of the Torah is pru or vu, that we have a mitzvah to try to have children. Obviously, one cannot say there's a chiyuv to have children, but there's a chiyuv to engage in ishtadlus, and Be'ezrat Hashem will give you the bracha. And there's machlokas, how are you makayim the mitzvah? And the Gemara says, we paskin like Beis Hillel, that the mitzvah is, you haven't completely fulfilled the mitzvah till you have at least one son and one daughter. So 10 sons will not be a kiyum mitzvah, and 11 daughters or 10 daughters. You have to have one son, one daughter, because you need to have both. And the Gemara discusses, what if, God forbid, a child dies, but you could still be makayim it by a surviving grandchild. There's even a das yochid ma'od of Rav Shlomo Kluger that says you could be makayim pru or vu through adoption, because he points out Chazal have a lashon, if you're magadol yasem v'yasem b'teich beisai, if you raise an orphan, my lala because of pila yalda, it's as if you have given birth. So he takes that very literally. But as I say, that's a das yochid. We don't seem to paskin that way. And the Gemara is very, very interesting, esoteric shilas. What if you had children as a goy and then you converted? Can you be makayim pru or vu with the children you had as a goy? And does it make a difference if they're Jewish children or not Jewish children? Do they have to convert or not convert? Different shilas. But it is clear. The one thing that is absolutely clear is you're not makayim pru or vu till you have a ben ubas. So if that's so, the idea of praying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that your children should be bonim will only be either if it's your first one or you already have a son and a daughter. One B'dafka shouldn't pray in a way that will not fulfill the mitzvah of pru or vu. Now, as to the general question, why should I pray for sons? Is that demeaning to women? Is that saying that a daughter is not so valuable? In China, which had a policy, they maybe still have a policy of only one child. So if people had a daughter, they would often leave and they wouldn't be able to have another child if the daughter would be known to the authorities. They left the daughter to die in the forest so they could still have a son. Obviously, we don't believe in that. That's rishus, that's ritzicha. So why is it such a big deal? Why do we want a son more than we want a daughter? It is a good question. I don't have a complete answer to that. A son is able to do more mitzvos. A son has the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. So as a result, there are special zechuyos that a zocher can bring into the world that an akeva only does indirectly, such as by getting married and raising her children a certain way. So in that sense, a son has a certain maila. Pragmatically, and this may be less true today, pragmatically, the son has a maila because the son in those days could economically take care of their parents more so than a daughter, although I have to say in modern life, a daughter is often the much better caregiver than the son, but economically the son would be a bigger mefarnes. Again, that's more of a pragmatic consideration. Let me just point out as well that there is a counter text in Maseches Bava Basra, and you see this machlokas when it says, Hashem beirach es Avraham bakol. Hashem blessed Abraham with everything. What is the bakol? So there's a machlokas in the Gemara, and it really reflects two attitudes. One says, bakol, that not only did he have a son Yitzchak, but Hashem gave him a daughter. That was the highest blessing. That's one opinion. The other opinion says, Hashem blessed Avram in every way. He didn't give him a daughter. Now, again, when you learn Gemaras like this, you have to understand, obviously there are deeper meanings, but even in terms of simple pshat, it simply represents the idea that there were problems. On one hand, a daughter could be a phenomenal blessing. On the other hand, to bring up a girl, there are special, unique challenges, particularly in immoral environments. Remember, Avraham Avinu lived in largely immoral environments of Tumah. Right? A girl could, God forbid, be sexually abused, etc. So as a result, Chazal are being pragmatic and realistic that having daughters may create certain complications that you don't have with sons. So it's not a question of not the same chashivas, not the same dignity, not as worthwhile. It's simply a realistic recognition that both in terms of earning opportunities in those days, in terms of parnasa, in terms of being vulnerable, weak, subject to being attacked, daughters had certain problems. So therefore, it was thought that a son would be an easier type of child to raise. But again, that's not everybody's experience. And I don't think Chazal were stating it as a universal principle. And that's why you have these two views. The highest bracha was having a daughter, and the highest bracha was not having a daughter. Both of them are true in various ways.
If Chas v'Shalom, a war breaks out in Eretz Yisrael, would it have the din of Milchemes Mitzvah? And if so, would Yeshiva Bachrim be required to fight?
Yes, a very, very excellent question. Here is the issue, of course. The Torah exempts certain categories of people from war, but the Mishnah in Saita says that only applies to what is called a Milchemes Rishus, an optional war, like a war of expansion, which actually optional is a little bit of a misnomer because we cannot authorize that, but a Sanhedrin and a Melech can authorize a war of expansion. But Milchemes Mitzvah, it says Hakol Yaitzim, everybody has to go out and fight. Afilu Chasan Mechedre, we schlep the Chasan out of the wedding chamber. The Kala Mechupasa, and even the Kala, even a woman, that you have to explain from the chuppah. So Milchemes Mitzvah, there are no exemptions. That's what the Mishnah says. So question then becomes, alrighty, what is Milchemes Mitzvah? What is obligatory war? So the Rambam says in Hilchos Malachim that an obligatory war has three categories. One is the war to eradicate the 7 nations that inhabited Canaan, like the Chiti, the Amori. The second is the war against Amalek. Now, those first two we don't have today. The 7 nations are extinct. Amalek, at least as a physical entity, we either don't have or we don't know about. So those first two categories are no longer applicable until Mashiach comes, if then. But the third category is Lahoshia Yisrael Miyad Sor. If the Jewish people are under attack and we need to defend the Jewish people from an enemy that wants to destroy them, that is halachically defined as a Milchemes Mitzvah. And if it is halachically defined as a Milchemes Mitzvah, the Mishnah in Saita says there are no exemptions. So the question therefore becomes, if you have an enemy that attacks the state of Israel, that has millions and millions of Jews who live in the state of Israel, does that become a Milchemes Mitzvah, an obligatory war? If it does become a Milchemes Mitzvah, the Yeshiva Bachrim have to serve in the army. So first of all, let me point out the following. First, how do you know that B'nai Torah are exempt from army service at all? Mehechi Tesi. The Torah talks about a chasan, somebody who just got married. The Torah talks about somebody who bought a vineyard or planted a vineyard. The Torah talks about somebody who built a house. And the Torah talks about somebody that's very afraid. Okay, that's a particular Torah. Those are the 4 exemptions in the Torah. There is no exemption in the Torah for people who are learning Torah. So how do you know there is such an exemption at all? So the truth of the matter is, the makor of the exemption of people who are learning Torah is really not directly from the Gomorrah. It is from a passage in the Rambam at the end of Hilchos Shemitah V'Yovel, where the Rambam talks about Shevet Levi being exempt from war, because Shevet Levi was the chelek of Klal Yisrael that was set aside to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore their military service, so to speak, was the spiritual Torah and Tefillah. And then the Rambam extrapolates V'lo Shevet Levi Bilvad, that it is not only Shevet Levi that has this zechus, but every Jew who wants to give himself over to the full-time Avodas Hashem of Torah learning is like a Levi. Now, let me point out 2 interpretive jumps in the Rambam. First, the very fact that the Rambam, and by the way, the Rambam then says, Shevet Levi is not Yaitzel Milchama, whether it's Milchemes Reshus or Milchemes Mitzvah. This is a tremendously important Rambam that people sometimes don't focus on in this way. That the Rambam understands when the Mishnah in Saita says there are no exemptions for Milchemes Mitzvah, it doesn't mean there are no exemptions from Milchemes Mitzvah. It means the 4 exemptions in Parsha Shoftim for the Chasan, for the vineyard, for the bias, for the Yoreh, those exemptions don't apply to Milchemes Mitzvah. But the other exemption of Shevet Levi does. So the Rambam says, Beferish, Shevet Levi is exempt even from Milchemes Mitzvah. Now, that's a Chiddush. That is actually not in the Gomorrah, although I believe the Nosei Kalim identify it from a passage in the Sifri. Now, so jump number 1 of the Rambam is to recognize a new Patur of Shevet Levi from Milchemes Mitzvah. That's a big Chiddush. But then the Rambam seems to extend the Chiddush by saying, Lo Shevet Levi Bilvad, but every person who is Menadev. Now, there is a machlokas when the Rambam extends the Shevet Levi status to everybody else. Is he going back on the Milchama? Is the Rambam telling me that a full-time Ben Torah is exempt from Milchama, or is he just saying generally in Ruchnius he's like Shevet Levi? That's not so clear. The Rambam is not necessarily incorporating. I mean, for example, a Levi gets Meiser Rishon. Can I give Meiser Rishon to a Kailo person? No, I can't. So the assumption that the Rambam is incorporating the Patur of Milchama to the Shevet, to anyone who wants to be like Shevet Levi, that's Lavdavka anyway. But even if you say it is, and it patters, the question then becomes, who qualifies as Shevet Levi? Is it any Haredi? I think not. It's not a Haredi exemption. It's someone who is mamish Isaac B'Torah. So the truth of the matter is, to say that a Ben Torah, whatever that term even means, a Ben Torah is pater from something that is clearly a Milchemes Mitzvah, is not at all a pashut thing. To predicate the patur on halacha is a weak read. I mean, you can make a halachic argument, but there's a lot of counter halachic arguments you can make. But what is really at stake is this. What is really at stake is not so much the halachic debate, but facts on the ground. And the truth of the matter is that the state of Israel does not have a manpower shortage. And as a result, even if someone is chayiv to find a Milchemes Mitzvah, if they're not needed for that particular activity, then why take them? Why take people away from Torah? Why take people away from Tefillah? If we are makir that the Hatzlacha of Klal Yisrael depends at least as much on Ruchnius and certainly more on Ruchnius than on Gashmias, then we need to have people that are not going to go into the army. So this is really much more of a political and ideological debate than pure halacha. Meaning, if you would ask me, al pi halacha, if the state of Israel needed chayolim, would Bnei Torah have to fight? A strong argument could be made that they would, and then you could possibly use the Rambam as a patur, but it's not a mukhrich. But the Yikr point is that there is simply not a manpower need. You can see what is driving this whole military debate are not security considerations. They are not defense needs. They are a desire for the homogenization of Israeli society, the desire of social engineering, the desire of what's called shivoi hanetel, to make the burdens equal. They are political and social ends, which unfortunately could result in a lot of assimilation and a lot of people leaving Torah. So a strong case can be made that Bnei Torah and even Charedim in general should not be forced to serve in the army, but I would be a little reluctant to predicate it on strict halachic concerns, and at whatever point manpower participation is necessary, then indeed they would have to fight. unless you're machriya like the Rambam and interpret the Rambam a certain way, then you'd have an open question. Let me remind you, you may have heard this, that in 1948, even Chaim Kanevsky took a gun, I think it was for a week or whatever it was, and he manned a position because he felt he had an achrayas in a milchemes mitzvah to try to protect other Jews from being hurt. Of course, the big question is, if you're going to take the position that when, God forbid, there is a war, the B'nai Torah are going to be, would have to serve. Well, it's hard to serve unless you have basic training. So, would there be a chiyuv to take basic training in order to be able to serve? So there already we say, listen, we're not going to anticipate the worst, and we're not going to be machayev that type of basic training. So I guess I know my answer is a little long and maybe convoluted, but I think the bottom line is this is much more of an ideological debate, and it's a very important debate, but it's hard to rest it on solid halachic prohibitions. It's a little reminiscent in the 1950s when there was the great controversy in the early years of the state about drafting women. So the Chazon Ish, who very rarely signed any proclamation, signed a proclamation that said that if a woman is compelled to serve in the army, it is Yeharig Ve'al Yavar, she would have to give her life before she would serve in the army, and not only the army, but even Sheirut Lu'umi, national service, going to a hospital, going to a nursing home. And the truth of the matter is, there were Rabbanim who asked the Chazon Ish, what is the Yeharig Ve'al Yavar here? All right, the army may be Gili Arayas, but what, to have a woman visit nursing homes, they do it anyway. So they're doing it in the miskeret of the army or the government. And the Chazon Ish talked about the idea, this is where he said, this fifth chelik of Shulchan Aruch, that Gedolei Yisrael have a sense that certain things will be a chorban for Am Yisrael, even if you can't point to a specific paragraph in the Shulchan Aruch that says something is halachically usher. If you want to use a fancy term, we can call this meta halacha, the fifth chelik of Shulchan Aruch. And this is something, I have to say, that sometimes modern Orthodox people don't grasp, because they look at a rabbi, they look at a gadol as kind of a technician. This gadol knows all the rules in the Shulchan Aruch, and he can tell me if something fits the Shulchan Aruch or doesn't fit the Shulchan Aruch. But if he's just expressing his opinion is not better than my opinion. But that's a very, very big ties, because we believe that someone who devotes his life to Torah and Avodas Hashem acquires, this is called Das Torah, acquires an intuition, acquires a hergish of what is good for Klal Yisrael, what is good for Avodas Hashem. And Mimela, they can come out and say that certain things are absolutely usher, even if you cannot identify a particular halacha. So that's kind of how you have to view the issue with the army. Now, at the same time, I know probably hopelessly confusing people, but at the same time, I want to point out there's an opposite perspective, and that is, even if we are opposed to a compulsory government draft that is telling people they have to serve, but there are two counterpoints that I have to add to the narrative. Counterpoint number one is, if we are not serving because our service to Klal Yisrael is our learning, then we have to be conscientious in our learning in Avodah. It is actually unconscionable if there are boys who are dying in the army, and there are yeshiva guys that are hanging around in the street, going to pizza places, and the like. Meaning, if you want to be putter because of your learning, because you're Shevet Levi, then you got to be a Shevet Levi, number one. Point number two is you have to have hakaras hatov and respect for the people who are serving the army. Yes, you have your avodah, but recognize that they also have their avodah. And therefore, you don't look down at them. You don't spit at them. Lehepech, you have to be grateful for their sacrifices. And the good part of that is, if you're grateful for what they're doing, Shlomo HaMelech says, K'mayim upanim, water reflects the face that you show the water. I show them kavod. they will be machshiv, what I stand for as well. That's the second point. The third point is that what is good or bad for the klal is not always what is good or bad for the yachid. It may very well be that for some individual, even yeshiva boys, being in the army could be very, very good. It could give them discipline. It could give them structure. One does not say that something is totally bad or totally good. As a general rule, we don't want the government to compel us because we have to make our determinations. But we have to do so with respect for the chayolim. We have to do so with being very conscientious in our avodah. And we have to recognize that sometimes for individual people, the army is actually the right environment for them, provided we can arrange things in a good way. So it's more complicated. Now, in Eretz Yisrael, everything tends to be presented as white or black. Either you're totally good or you're an idiot, apikoros amalek. In reality, there is merit in all sides of this, and one needs to understand the complexities, the nuances, and the different ways these matters have to be addressed. So I apologize for confusing everybody, but this is, I think, the way of looking at it.
Does the concept of not studying Tanakh after sunset until Chatzos apply on Shabbos and Yom Tov?
Yeah, excellent question. First, let me point out that the minhag that some people have, that they do not do Torah shebichsav, they do not do Chumash, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, or even Tehillim at night, is not a halacha in the Shulchan Aruch. It is really from the Arizal, the Talmidim of the Arizal, who took the position that Torah shebichsav represents the koach of din, and nighttime is a time of din because the light of Hashem is concealed, and you don't want to strengthen the powers of din at a time of din. So therefore, their minhag was not to be Isaac in Torah shebichsav at night until Chatzais, which is already the second half of the night. You're going towards the day, so at that time it's already a zman of rachamim. Now, not everybody follows that. For example, in the Litvish yeshivas, if they're saying Tehillim for Chaylim, they will often say Tehillim at Ma'ariv, even though it's at night. Again, that's actually connected, that particular minhag. But yes, it is brought down in the many Makairis that this issue does not apply on Leil Shabbos, Friday night, or even Leil Yom Tov, because Yom Tov and Shabbos are kulo or. They are treated as days of rachamim, days of love, and therefore even the night is considered to be Laila Kayim Yoyer. The Pasuk in Tehillim says the night shines with the light of the day. So there certainly is a heter. Now let me point out as well that this whole thing, again, many people don't even follow it, but this whole thing has many, many, many kulas. For example, many say that if you are learning the Mamore Chazal on the Psukim, that is treated as Torah Shebal Peh and not Torah Shebichsav. So even if you're learning Chumash and Rashi, many are going to Matra because Rashi, B'Derech Klal, will bring Midrashim and bring Gomorrahs. So as a practical matter, unless you're learning just the naked Psukim or saying the Tehillim, as a practical matter, most of the time, most of the Limudim with Meforshim will in fact be mutter, even like the Machmirim, even if it's not Friday night.
Can you read the Mishpacha magazine in the bathroom?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is an interesting issue. We talked about before what you can think about in the bathroom, and in a magazine like Mishpacha, you can read it in the bathroom, but you can't read all of it. Meaning, obviously, Mishpacha magazine has a Divrei Torah, so you can't read those per se. You're allowed to bring them in because they're covered. They basically are covered by the front cover, the back cover, and the pages in the middle. But you can read about what's going on in Bnei Brak and what's going on in Yerushalayim or London or New York. But it's very, very tricky because intermingled in the articles, there may be Mamare Chazal. You try to avoid focusing on that. But yes, there are certainly parts of the magazine that you can read, even in the bathroom, and you're allowed to have it in the bathroom.
What is Hashem's Shechina?
Yeah, well, yeah. So the word Shechina, which is feminine, by the way, the Shechina means God's presence, and that's not the same as God. God's presence is the aspect of God that we are able to feel and incorporate in our personalities and our interactions. So Shekhinah, you might say, is the aspect of divinity, of God's infinity that connects to our finite physical selves. So we're margish, the Shekhinah, that's the light of Hashem that is shayach for our hargasha. Now, Kabbalistically, and here obviously I am not going to fully explain this, and I obviously don't fully understand it either. But Kabbalistically, the Shekhinah is described as the feminine element of God, and just like when you have a male and a female relationship, the male connects to the female and infuses the female with his seed. So Kabbalah describes the notion of the unification of Hashem with the Shekhinah, in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Zohar, the Shekhinah is the Nekeva, and therefore the Shekhinah is Makabel, the Or of Hashem. Now, obviously, these ideas are very, very dangerous and are very prone to being misunderstood, because that would connote literally, God forbid, a duality in Hashem, which is not true. But still, this is the meaning of the Lashon. You'll see in the Shem Yichud that is recited before many mitzvahs, the Shem Yichud Kutsha Baricha Ushechintei. I am doing these mitzvahs to unify HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shekhinah, and that actually means to create a union of the masculine and the feminine elements in order to produce a shefa, a beneficence into this world. What exactly that means, it's not. We're not on that madrega, but that is the Kabbalistic understanding of the Shekhinah, that it is the feminine aspect of God that unites with Kutsha Baruch Hu.
Is someone allowed to generally clean, organize their house room on Shabbos?
Yeah, it's a good question. It really depends on what their motivation is. If their motivation is, for example, that my mother is coming tomorrow and the house better be clean, or my mother's going to be disappointed, you can't really do that, because that's hachana. You're preparing on Shabbos for what you need during the week. If, on the other hand, I look at my house and my house is such a mess, I can't focus, I can't concentrate, it makes me depressed. And if I could just organize things a little better, I would have a menuchas hanefesh. It is something that you are allowed to do, because it's something that gives you a certain onek Shabbos and a certain restfulness. And one could even say it's an honor of Shabbos to try to make your house a little cleaner, a little more organized. So really, you have to kind of ask yourself, what are your motivations? It's not always so easy to figure out what your motivations are. Am I doing this because during the week it'll make my life easier? Or am I doing this because this gives me a menuchas hanefesh of Shabbos itself? Of course, if you are organizing, you have to be careful to observe the laws of Shabbos. For example, reorganizing your books may sometimes be a shiloh of borer, right? You're separating what you don't want and putting it somewhere else. So one has to be very, very careful that whatever cleaning you're doing, whatever organizing you're doing, is not a violation of Hilchos Shabbos.
How do we understand the concept of Safek Rabbanan Lahakal? Why are we more makel, especially for easy Drabanans like Sfiras HaOmer? If it's a Safek, why were Chazal makel?
Yeah, a very excellent question. In fact, let me give you a little background on this. Again, the one who asked me the question knows this, but let me just be sure everyone's on the same page. We have, of course, two famous rules in halachic decision making. One is Safek D'Oraisa L'Chumra, that whenever there's a doubt regarding a Torah commandment, you have to be machmir. So if I don't remember if I said Shema, I got to say it again. I have to err on the side of strictness. But then if it's a rabbinic commandment, we say Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula. So if I don't remember if I daven Shemona Esrei, which is only mitrabanan, I don't daven again. I say Shema again. I don't daven Shemona Esrei, if maybe I did it. Now the emes is like this. Let me start off with a famous question the Ramban asks on the Rambam. The Rambam actually says that every single chiyuv d'Rabbanan is a chiyuv d'Oraisa. The Torah is mechayev you to listen to the takanos and gezeros of Chazal. And if you're over on a takana or gezerah of Chazal, you're over on a d'Oraisa. The Torah says in Parshas Shoftim, Leisasor mikol she'agidu lecha yamin usmol, do not turn away from whatever Hashem says, and there's a mitzvah saseh al pi Torah asher yarucha, right? You should follow the Torah. Says the Rambam, if I'm over on a drabanan, I transgress a negative and positive commandment of the Torah itself. And the Rambam says, and that is why on a mitzvah drabanan like Hanukkah menorah, I make the bracha asher kiddishanu the mitzvah sav. Hashem commanded me to light Hanukkah candles. Where did Hashem command you to light Hanukkah candles? The answer is Leisasar. This is the Rambam, based on the Gomorrah and Shabbos. So the Ramban asks the Gavaldiga Kasha. So it turns out that every time I'm in doubt whether I fulfilled a rabbinic commandment, I'm in doubt whether I fulfilled or may possibly transgressed if I didn't do it, the biblical commandment. So every Safek D'Rabbanan should become a Safek D'Oraisa. How could you be Machalek? The Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula, Safek D'Oraisa L'Chumra. This is the Ramban's Kasha on the Rambam. So says the Kesef Mishnah, a Gavaldiga Teretz. Says the Kesef Mishnah, you're only over on a D'Oraisa if you're violating what the Chachamim told you to do. But if the Chachamim themselves told you, in case of doubt, you are supposed to be Mekel. So when I'm Mekel, I'm not over on the Safek D'Oraisa of Leisasar. I'm Vadai not over on Leisasar because the Chachamim themselves told me I don't have to do this. Gavaldiga Teretz, extremely logical teretz. But this now leaves us with the question. Now we have the exact question you're asking. Okay, granted, once the Chachamim tell me not to do it, if I don't do it, it's not a Safek Leisasar, it's Vadai not a Leisasar. But why did they tell me not to do it? Tell me to do it. So the Rashba says, I believe in Maseches Rosh Hashanah, very important yesod, that it's necessary for the Chachamim to differentiate rabbinic laws from Torah laws. Because if they were to make rabbinic laws the same as Torah laws, their rabbinic law would be in violation of the prohibition of adding on to the Torah. As it were, there's a fundamental problem. The Torah says, don't add, so how could the Rabbanan add? There are different answers for that. Some say, well, if the Chachamim says, if the Torah says they can make takanas, then you're not adding, you're doing what the Torah says. But the Rashba's answer is that the Isra of Bal Taisef is only if they would make a rabbinic law exactly the same as the Torah. But if they make certain leniency, so you know it's not the same as a Doraisa, then it's not called a Haisafa to the Torah. And therefore, the din of Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula is a necessary predicate to give legitimacy to the Kayach of Chazal to make Takanas and Gezeros. This is what the Rashba says. This is not a Pasha teretz at all, because unfortunately, I mean, you will find many cases where the Chachamim made rabbinic laws that are stricter than the Torah, and then the paradigm doesn't fit. But as a general rule, this is kind of the guiding yesod that the Rashba gives us.
That's it for the questions.
Okay, well, again, I want to say that I hope that all of you should have much chizuk. A Jew is never alone. We're always with Avinu Shebashamayim. And I hope and I pray, and I know that all of you together are hoping and praying that Hashem should bring a Yeshua. It is said that Rav Moshe was always a little sad when Rosh Chodesh Iyar came, because he said Nisan is the month of Geula. And once Nisan passes, so things are not so clear as they were. But still, Afalpi Sheyismameya, even when Mashiach delays. I wait every day. Now, granted, he won't come Erev Shabbos. That we happen to know. So it can't be tomorrow. It can't be tonight or tomorrow. But Be'ezrat Hashem, it should be B'karav. We should be Zeicha to the Yeshua's Hashem that can come. And may Klal Yisrael, may the whole world be Zeicha to experience the Yeshua's Hashem in a very, very good way. And I wish you all much bracha and hatzlacha. It was good to be talking to you. Thank you.